The following is a program by the Red Ant Collective, a voice for revolutionary Marxism from inside imperialist Australia. In today's episode, we are looking at the 2022 Brazilian elections. Red Ant member Andrew M. interviews Brazilian Australian Dr. Ana Cavalcante, a political activist most of her adult life who works in the area of violence against women. In Brazil, she was a member of the Socialist Democracy group within the Brazilian Workers' Party and an organiser in its youth group. In Australia, Ana has been involved in pro-abortion and anti-violence against women campaigns, particularly for the rights of survivors of violence trying to live in Australia while their visa status is uncertain. Welcome, Andrew and Ana.
So we are going to be discussing today the October 30 Brazilian elections. And the elections have been in process for the last month. There's been a high level of campaigning, and we want to get a deeper understanding of what's happening in Brazil. The first thing I guess we can note in these elections is there is a high level of polarization, but also a high degree of abstention, which seems to be a phenomenon in Brazilian elections. So can you describe the level of inequality in Brazil and what hardships ordinary people are facing and why there is this polarization at the moment?
Okay, so I think there are a lot of important ideas for us to get out in that first question. And one of them is that Brazil is a historically unequal country. So for years in late 20th century, early 21st century, Brazil would appear on top of the list of the world countries in inequality, sometimes, swapping with Sierra Leone often. So this is a historical problem. And this was definitely a problem that was addressing this problem was highlighted during the Workers' Party's governments between 2002 and 2016. So since we inequality continued but got reduced, and now we see that increasing again in the current government, and particularly since 2019. So what we've been seeing is Brazil was out of what we call the hunger map. So the countries that have people that are really in the starving, and Brazil is back on that map. So we had been out of that for almost a decade, and we're back on that map. And what we see in Brazil is really an increase in unemployment, an increase in homelessness, an increase of people actually going to the butcher and asking for bones, or butchers selling bags of bones for people to cook because they do not have the money to buy meat. We had episodes of trucks transporting bones and being stopped by groups, or there was an accident and then trying to take the bones home. So it's a very serious situation where people are literally starving.
Okay, so it's quite extreme levels of despair and poverty. In this situation, Jair Bolsonaro has come to power and things have worsened. Can you explain his rise to power and how would you characterize his government?
So I think it's important that we understand, and you were mentioning before the polarization in Brazil, and one thing that is important to say is that Brazil is, as many countries, a very conservative country, has been a country very against left progressive and particularly socialist or communist ideas. So the Workers' Party in power is an exception and not the rule. Yeah, having progressive and having left-wing governments in power is the exception and not the rule. So what we see is that the Brazilian elites, particularly the rural aristocracy. Brazil is a country that is very much run by the farming industry, cattle, and exports. Like our main exports are all, rural productions, right? So it's mainly soy and corn and cattle. That's the kind of things that really run the country's economy. And that rural aristocracy that really has been running the countryside of the country for over 400 years is very quick to support whoever will stop any progressive ideas from taking root. So what we saw in 2018. So what we saw with Bolsonaro is pretends to be a new face to politics, and in that way very similar. All that idea of Trump from the tropics, it has some resonance. That idea is real, because he plays that outsider card when actually he has been a politician for over 30 years. He actually never had a job in the private sector in his life. He was in the military, and then he became a local and then a federal representative for Rio de Janeiro. So he is a man that has been in politics for a very long time, always very conservative ideas, always very fiery ideas, speaking publicly really to get a reaction, being as extreme as possible. And he would appear in a lot of TV shows in a lot of ways, gathering that attention to his extreme ideas. And he has always, for 30 years, he has always he didn't really present projects. In 30 years, he presented 2 projects as a federal representative. So the man is really not working at all, not even for conservative ideas. But he has supported categories such as the military and the police, and that has been his support base, and this has been the categories that are still with him. And as he became more prominent in TV with these categories, and he has adult sons that are really connected to international right-wing groups, and that's the idea of manipulating internet opinion and taking social media and making use of fake news really gave him prominence in 2018. I think we have way more understanding of that landscape nowadays, but 2016 to 2019, I think we're all learning how much fake news could spread and how bad things could be. And as that took up, yes, then he started to get all that support from the rural aristocracy, from urban elites, from all the bourgeois that would support anyone that holds back the Workers' Party.
So we see a phenomenon that's similar to Trump in the US. The previous 2 presidents were members of the PT Workers' Party. How are they faring in this election? I mean, we see a lot of popularity and popular sentiment expressed towards Lula, the opposition candidate. Can you tell us a bit about Lula? There seems to be a bit of a mythology around Lula. He's a very perhaps paternalistic figure. There's a big figure in Brazilian politics, either loved or loathed. Can you explain a bit more about his legacy?
Yes, absolutely. So love or hate the man, he definitely knows how to speak to people. He definitely knows how to speak to large crowds, how to communicate his ideas well. He's very clear in his way of communicating. So that definitely helps to be a very popular politician. But Lula comes from the northeast of Brazil, and that is relevant because there is a lot of racism inside the country, and there is a lot of discrimination against people from the northeast. And he moves to São Paulo as a worker, to working in factories, and becomes a union leader. During the dictatorships, actually, he got arrested for union activity. He has never been a socialist, but has always been a union member and someone very committed to advancing the rights of workers. So he has been arrested during the dictatorship due to union activity. Around the end of dictatorship, so 84. So since 82 to 84, the discussions about the PT starting as a political party start, and he's the leader of that, bringing groups together to start the political party. He was the party candidate in 89, lost the election, but went to the second round and we have a lot of candidates in Brazil, so you have a first round of elections, and then the top 2, if none of them has more than 50% of the valid votes, meaning the votes that actually hit the counted votes. If no one has more than 50%, then you go to a second round. So he went to the second round in 89, and if you see these speeches there, very, very radical ideas, even to this day. he lost the following 2 elections, but is there in the eyes of the people, is there building the party, is there bringing forward progressive ideas. And then he wins the election in 2002 and 2006, and he leaves his government actually with 80% of approval rate. And a lot of the criticism from the left at that time, good old days when we could criticize and aim for even higher stakes, was that actually someone with 80% approval could be doing even more for the people. He had enough support to actually be doing even more, but he did a lot. And he becomes the first president in Brazil to actually, since the democracy returns in 84, 85, he becomes the first president to actually elect his successor. So he gets re-elected, and then he helps to elect Dilma. That is the first and so far only Brazilian female president, someone with actually a real socialist past. Sorry, don't know if power, but definitely past. And she gets elected and re-elected. And he was a big supporter of her, and he's a figure that keep building the party and keep being in the eyes of the public through all this time. And then when Dilma goes through an impeachment, so she suffered an impeachment, she's removed from power, she's re-elected in 2014, removed from power in 2016, and her vice president simply starts undoing a lot of the Workers' Party policies. It's a real betrayal that starts in 2016 and opens the way for what became Jair Bolsonaro's government from January 2019. So Lula has been in the eyes of people for a very long time. He has refined his speech. He has, become better at communicating different places. He has become, the party has grown, and he has delivered as a president a lot of gains for the poor and for the banks and for the rich. So his popularity finds echo in the material reality of what he has delivered to the country.
Okay, so when Dilma Rousseff was impeached, how much did that damage the PT? And have they recovered from what would have been a political disgrace for them? Or can you explain the impeachment process?
Yes, absolutely. So what happens there? So attacks on PT always happened. And I think there always will be, unfortunately. But since 2005, when Lula is preparing to attempt his re-election, a lot of corruption scandals start to hit PT, and a lot of them really, unfounded, or really an overreach to say that the Workers' Party was involved in that scandal. But anyway, so there was a real a push for that attempt to associate Workers' Party and corruption. And when Dilma, that is in many ways one of the most honest people that has been in power, according to what investigations have presented later on, get hit with, so she is finding difficult to operate in a space where, a lot of corruption is happening, and a lot of center and center-right representatives are pushing more and more for, her government to betray what is the Workers' Party project. And in an attempt so they start to present, these representatives to start to present to what happens in parliament, that you present an attempt to investigate and then do an impeachment. And many times it goes nowhere. So against Jair Bolsonaro, the current president, we have over 50 of those, and none of them has been investigated. So those things are presented all the time. If Parliament is actually interested in investigating or not is a different conversation. And Dilma had, I think, 2, and all very minor. And she allows for investigations to be done against the leader of Parliament. That is, he's in jail now, so that may say something. And he pulls one of those requests of investigation against her out of the pile. That is about, it's really a very administrative issue. is about calculating the budget in a specific way that could not be done at that time in the year. It's really not about putting money in the pocket. It's really a very administrative issue, but it goes all the way, and she gets impeached. And later on, not only they made what she did, what her government did, administratively legal, literally months after her impeachment, what was done in that government becomes legal and is law now in Brazil. But she has also in recent years been exonerated of any guilt. So it's been seen that it was really an illegal process. So that really, really hurts PT, but PT is not going to be really hurt. So that hurts the image of the party, that hurts the party electorally. But what really hurts is what happened in parallel, that is Lava Jato. So Lava Jato, or the car wash investigation in Brazil that was led by the Judge Moro in Brazil, that now has been just elected to the Senate, and has, after being a judge, being the minister for the legal advisor, the legal minister for Jair Bolsonaro. So he takes that position after the elections. But he was fundamental in the car wash process to associate, again, corruption happened elsewhere to Lula, and then use it to put Lula in jail. And Lula spends 536 days in jail for a crime he did not commit. And that hurts. So that's when finally Lula could not run as a candidate in 2018. And the image of the Workers' Party is associated with corruption and being in jail. And since then, Lula is leading the elections, so a lot of it has been demystified since, but a lot of it still finds echo in the more conservative or the less politically savvy groups in the country.
So it's quite a feat of the political establishment to tar the PT Workers' Party with corruption when the whole establishment is politically quite corrupt. And yet Jair Bolsonaro and his government have been able to operate with what would appear to be a high degree of impunity. And you can see some similar themes with the Trump administration in the way they're handling this election. Bolsonaro has indicated that he won't recognise the legitimacy of the elections. So how has Lula da Silva responded to this?
So I think that Lula has been, not only him, but a lot of segments of society have been quite vocal about defending political institutions in Brazil and defending democracy. So this has been the tone of the conversation. So valuing institutions, including the Electoral Commission, the voting system, and that other segments of society have written public letters supporting that our system is safe, is valid, should be protected, is important for constitutional powers to be upheld. So this has been the tone of the conversation. But at the same time, that creates difficulty for the left when we have to criticize bourgeois institutions that are not always work to the benefit of the workers and the working poor in the country. So obviously this makes the conversation very narrow, but Lula, supported by really large segments of society, has been bringing back this idea of safe elections. The fight in the Supreme Court ended up with one of the Supreme Court judges that is also the Electoral Commission leader for this election. They rotate. He has agreed with the military overseeing some of the process, and that has been their demand this year. And they have promised they would release a report about their findings. They have not released the report, and they have not released the report, we imagine, because a lot of the supporters of Bolsonaro have been elected. So we got Senate premiers, we got federal representatives, state representatives, all elected, large portions that are Bolsonaro supporters, and Bolsonaro is in the second round. So we imagine that's why we haven't seen a report, but they have not dropped that card yet, even though, Lula and large segments of society keep insisting on this conversation of basic rules around democracy.
So Bolsonaro has been quite a bizarre figure throughout Brazilian politics over the last few decades. And he has an extensive record of very callous, provocative comments. And the opposition has seized recently on comments that he would eat the flesh of an indigenous person. And he's
That's
been
right.
labelled Cannibal Bolsonaro. This would seem quite outrageous, yet a sizable portion of the population support him. How is this possible?
I would say there are a few reasons why this is still the case. One thing is conservatism and neo-fascist ideas are real. So there are people that really identify with a lot of what he says. It finds echo in segments of society. We can't ignore that. It's not all created from his own head. The other thing is the phenomenon we have been observing for a few years with fake news, but with social media in general, with fake and real news, that a lot of people do not have contact with the full extent of news. They have contact with whatever their friends forward to them. A lot of the Bolsonaro through the years has been really undermined the importance of established news companies. So a lot of followers of Bolsonaro will be very vocal about, I don't watch TV anymore. I just follow what my, pastor sends me. I just follow what my family members, my friends send me on WhatsApp. It's a very popular app in Brazil, or, similar, or Facebook or whatnot. So a lot of people simply do not get in contact with the same amount of news you get in contact with, and vice versa. And people's ability to differentiate fake news from actual facts is limited when the access to news is limited. And also they have been Bolsonaro has even in many of his bizarre comments has said he believes that fake news is valid in an electoral dispute. So they make no secret of it. But the other thing that I believe is important to say is the big news media, the big corporations, even though they are attacked by Bolsonaro daily, they have never given an inch to Lula or to the left. If you look at what has been covered in the beginning of this year, they keep talking about the third way. So terceira via. And they were really obsessed with finding a candidate that would be the third way, that would avoid polarization. And we have a lot of problems with that word in itself, because of false polarization, right? If the polarization between fascism and basic principles of democracy, and that's a polarization you want to avoid, well, what are you actually aiming for? Then that's a good polarization. That's exactly what should be happening. Actually, there should be anyone on the fascist side, or the neo-fascist or fascist-like side, if you want to be politically correct. So large media corporations have not reported extensively in some of those outlandish claims, in some of the things that he has said or he has done. Bolsonaro is actually convicted. He's a convicted criminal. He should not be in power. So before he ran for president, when he was still a federal member, he actually was charged with what in Brazil is known as apology to rape, because he made claims to a woman, another federal representative, that equate. He told her, I would, so trigger warning for everybody, but I would not rape you because you're not good enough for me to rape you, or something on that sense. And he has repeated those remarks. That actually is a crime in Brazil. Rape apology is a crime. He has been convicted in 2 levels. So if the second conviction actually went through, he could not have run for the first presidency, but the judges magically decide to give the conviction after he had been elected, so holding him back. So if he's not elected, he's actually a convicted criminal that has to pay for what he did. So that's another interesting thing. So you see how a lot of the bourgeois media, the bourgeois judicial system, even though they are being attacked by him, they do not become friends with the Workers' Party or with the working poor of that country, even in those circumstances. The other two things I want to highlight, because I think it's an important question for us to reflect. So these are important things to reflect. Another two important parts to highlight is Bolsonaro has a lot of support from evangelical churches, or that have been growing in the country, and we have seen a lot of not only pastors. Obviously, not all evangelical people are the same. Not all evangelical pastors are the same, and not all of them would be, using their spiritual space to actually, pretty much force the followers of that place to vote for Bolsonaro. But we have seen very extreme things. A lot of these evangelical leaders are politicians and have been really trying to manipulate who people vote for. And finally, what has happened during the Bolsonaro government, because as I said, he's not only dangerous and extreme right-wing and horrible in many ways, he's also highly incompetent and corrupt. So one thing that is important about it is that he has dedicated a portion of the budget in Brazil that has grown since 2020 to what has been known now as secret budget. That is budget that is going straight to federal representatives to take to specific cities to keep their electorate happy, with no accountability in the books. That in 2022 account for 16 billion reais, and that would make something around $6 billion, $7 billion, but it's not good to translate. This is a lot of money in Brazil. And this money is totally no accountability. And this money keeps certain electorates very loyal to whoever is bringing the money, and therefore very loyal to Bolsonaro. Do you feel that answer, besides the police and the military that have definitely been big supporters?
Sorry, I think we were breaking up there. I see that the far right in Brazil is operating with a large degree of impunity. And you mentioned his sons had direct connections with the far right. Is fascism on the march in Brazil?
Yes, it is. I think there is no secret. One of Bolsonaro's sons is a federal representative called Eduardo Bolsonaro, representative for São Paulo, my state. And he goes to all extreme rights events around the world. He speaks some English, so he's usually the international face of the Bolsonaro family. Bolsonaro has managed to put all his adult sons in politics in one way or another. And they're all they operate very together as a family. And when Eduardo Bolsonaro was supporting his father's campaign and the other brothers in 2018, they had direct contact with Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon has supported them since. Bolsonaro has publicly spoke of Viktor Orban from Hungary as a brother, and he was the last, or at least one of the last presidents to compliment Biden on his win against Trump. He defended that the election was stolen from Trump. So he has made no secret of those ideas. Many members of Bolsonaro's government were caught replicating Nazi symbols or fascist discourse, and some of them got fired and some of them have not. He is an ultra-reactionary, but like Trump, he's a hypocrite. So he will, have all that fascist discourse around family and private property, And here we were at the same time, he has accusations of DV against his ex-wife. He's on his third marriage, and he's still blaming other people for wanting to destroy family. So he's a hypocrite, but definitely a very ultra-right, very flirting with fascism discourse and fascist figures and symbols at all times.
Okay, well, the United Nations doesn't normally intervene or comment on elections. However, they've called on authorities to make sure they're conducted fairly in Brazil, and they've warned about increasing death threats, particularly towards Afro-descendants and LGBTI candidates. How real is the threat of violence in this election?
It's very real, and it's not just a threat, it has already happened. So Workers' Party supporters have been killed in the lead up to the elections. Bolsonaro made guns way more accessible in Brazil. And in the last 4 years, the amount of guns in the country have doubled, and the ones acquired legally. So gun violence is on the rise in many metrics. It all depends how you measure it, but in many metrics. And we had politically motivated threats that had been the reason why many candidates from the Workers' Party interrupt their campaigning, particularly Haddad, the candidate for premier in São Paulo. And we had cases of killings and severe assaults of militants. So the fear that will get worse is very real, and we are all very concerned how things will play in the next 2 weeks and after the results are published.
Okay. Well, we do see, though, in Latin America, a bit of a shift to the left. We see there's a left-wing government in Chile, Colombia. We can characterize them in different ways. But would you say that there is a general turn to the left, and this will affect Brazil? Like, how is the developments in Latin America affecting consciousness in Brazil at the moment?
Historically, things seem to go the other way around, maybe because of the size of Brazil. It seems that it's more what happens in Brazil having waves around our neighbors than what happens if our neighbors have waves in our country. But what we see is the right wing attempts to use use Venezuela, use Argentina, use even the turn in Colombia as a way to bring up the threat of communism in Brazil. So to say, communism is surrounding us, and the left has been really defensive with that, very much, as I said, in this. We are just this big family of democracy, and not really attempting to capitalize on the gains in the neighborhood. At the same time, it's hard to see how those gains have echo with the militants, with the activists. You don't really see the activists themselves embracing those gains as something that can be inspiring the movement inside Brazil. Maybe that will be seen in a different moment in time. What we see, though, that I think is important, is that when the leaders of those countries openly express support to Lula or dislike for Bolsonaro, that has echo in terms of our foreign policy and international relations. So Brazil, so a lot of what the left will talk about is Bolsonaro has a terrible relationship, him and his government, terrible relationship with these other leaders, not only from the left. Brazil managed to develop a terrible relationship with France, almost impossible, and considering the ties between the two countries, I mean. But so a lot of this is used as a leverage to discuss international relations, but it has not been used that useful to radicalize the activists or inspire the activists in the country, but maybe that will come in a different moment.
Okay. So it's hard to really fathom the full extent of radicalization in Brazil, but it seems to be going in so many different directions. You mentioned before the rise of evangelical religions that seem to be quite radical, but right-wing, and perhaps they are, how can you put it, millenarian, in that they're looking at these days as the last days. I mean, this is really quite a bizarre phenomenon. What would you credit it to, and why has this happened?
So I think with understanding all of these questions, and maybe hours in each of them, and we the rise in the evangelical church's presence in Latin America and is something that is not by chance, right? There is a push from evangelical churches in the US to really expand in Latin America and Africa, and they've been successful in doing that, and they've been successful for a number of reasons. They've been successful because opening an evangelical church, and I'm calling evangelical this big group of churches that come out of the Christian the seizures, the Christian Catholicism, understanding that some of these churches are really this really out there evangelical, and they may need to be differentiated from the Baptist or the Methodist. So I'm talking really, really broad here, trying to be respectful. But if we talk about the expansion, they are cheap to expand. You can open an evangelical church literally in your backyard, comparing to a Catholic church that has all bureaucracy from the hierarchy in the church to open one. You need years to become a priest, while you can be a pastor in literally months. And it is an economically viable thing to do, to become a pastor, and probably increase your lifespan comparing to drug dealing. That may be the other option when you are living in a really poor area, in a really poor country. You can pinpoint the expansion of these churches to they are everywhere. They are everywhere. But the extreme expansion to really poor areas in Brazil and poor areas in many places in Latin America and Africa. And another reason, it's easy to understand why someone may want to open a church and why someone may be able to open a church, but why a church, an evangelical church would become popular, right? Well, again, it's local, comparing to maybe other religious practices that are more hierarchical and therefore maybe in more central areas of the city and not so local. And it offers support to people where the government's failing. So many times those churches will really offer emotional support, will offer spiritual support, but they will also lend you money. In Brazil, we have a very left-wing socialist philosopher called Vladimir Safatli. And Vladimir Safatli has been writing a lot about it extensively. I think he writes a bit in English. And he talks about it, about, when you are part of a religious community, a local evangelical community, and you are a hairdresser, there's where your clients come from. You're a mechanic, that's where your clients come from. People are not going to travel from the centers to the slums to fix their cars. Your clients are there, right? And a lot of the economy in Brazil is becoming less and less formal, more and more individualized, and therefore you get that need, let people less and less informal jobs and more doing these small jobs around. The other thing is, if you're friends with the pastor, they help you to find jobs. They may put their name down in the bank for you to get a loan to start your business. They may be able to support you with your children if you're a single mother, and so you can go and work, and they go and pick up the children at school or whatnot. So there is a lot about being part of those communities, especially when the government's not doing their job. Another analysis in Brazil specifically is that with the distribution of the reduction in inequality and the government benefits that actually the Workers' Party created, a lot of people actually had money to contribute to those evangelical churches. So to pay the 10% of their salary that usually is expected in those spaces. So that also gave those churches more, financial, funds to keep expanding. So that's another place to analyze their expansion. And they tend to be quite conservative, and they tend to be quite, even though they operate quite individualized, they also have some form of hierarchy that at the top you have quite conservative and often politically involved members.
I can understand it partly having a background or growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, that there is, if you are in desperation and poverty, people search for salvation in some way, shape, or form. I'm wondering just on that, if there's any sort of nostalgia for amongst the middle classes for the US-backed military dictatorship that was from 1964 to 1985, and if that has much impact in these elections today.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there is one of the things we saw in these elections is actually the abstentions, the complete abstentions were actually lower than in previous elections. So in some ways it was more polarized. Usually the third place candidates get around 12-16% votes, sometimes 9%. The third place candidate got 4%. So in many ways the first round was the second round coming ahead. And I'm just sharing these numbers for us to think, but one of the things that we realize in Brazil, the voting is mandatory for people over 18. And between 16 and 18, it's an individual decision. And I cannot remember, I apologize, if it's over 65 or over 70, I think it's over 70 is also up to you, is an individual decision. It's not mandatory anymore. And usually what it means is that people over 70 do not vote. And that's what really inflates the number of abstentions, because they're registered to vote, they do not vote. And they really voted this year. They voted on the back of some fake news, we believe, but also they really voted, because they still have some melancholy, some reminiscence about the good old days of the dictatorship. The coup saved us from communism. It was a very secretive government, so people really did not know how much corruption was going on, how much torture, how much killings. All people could see was like this really, the party line, right? All they could see was really what the government was selling, was a lot of censorship in the media. So people got this idea that was a government that was highly functional, that was getting a lot of things done. And it was also a government that went in a lot of debt. And this creates to people a huge sense of safety. People felt that there were jobs for everybody, that the streets were safe, that things were in place. And that's very much what the propaganda was telling them, but also, injecting money into the economy that really wasn't there to begin with. So yes, there is some, and there are some, unfortunately, there's some young people that have been sold that line. One thing that we may talk about is how much what happened in Brazil was we never reckoned with our past. So different from Chile and Argentina and many other countries, we never prosecute the military leaders that were involved in the coup. We never had, what we had in Brazil was an amnesty deal that forgave the left that pick up weapons and was in exile in other countries, so allowed them to return to Brazil without any penalty, and as if being exiled from your own country is not penalty enough, and allowed the leaders of the coup to not to be prosecuted as well. So no one was prosecuted. No one has ever gone to jail for the fact that Brazil spent 20 years under a military coup. And when Dilma, the previous president from the Workers' Party, that was arrested and tortured during the dictatorship for her left-wing activities, when she was engaging in what was called the Truth Commission. So no one could be prosecuted for that, but we would bring the truth out for the parents of people that got killed or disappeared during the regime. And this very much coincides with the time the right start to destabilize her government. So the military never left. They've been around, and the elites that back the military have been around ever since. And they keep, and the lies they had all the power to tell they tell nowadays with a bit less freedom, but they're still telling. So there are some new generations that are connected by blood or by training with them and will repeat those lines, unfortunately.
Okay, so today we see a greater level of uncertainty and fear amongst the general populace. I guess that's understandable since we've seen quite severe economic damage under the Bolsonaro regime, but also environmental damage, like the rate of deforestation has increased by 75% since 2019. So has the future use of the Amazon been an election issue?
Well, that's complex. It should be an election. The discussion of the protection and preservation of the Amazon and all ecosystems should be a huge election issue, and we anticipated it would, but it's not. Actually, we are not discussing ideas at all in this election, and that's very frustrating. The right has been very successful, so Bolsonaro supporters have been very successful in pushing the discussion to reactionary, cultural, costume-based talking points. So abortion, family structure, relationship with God, and deviating from actual, real, material, concrete people's needs in the country that can actually be addressed by federal government, as none of those other issues can be actually addressed by federal government, according to the Brazilian constitution. So this is not appearing in the discussion, but it's also a complex discussion because the sovereignty over Amazon forest has always been a complex discussion. It's a forest across a few countries, and there is a lot of international interest in preserving the forest, but also in exploiting the forest in different ways. So the real how to really support and protect the Amazon and its ecosystem and the indigenous people that live there is a really complex topic that is not getting any airtime, sorry, at all.
That is really quite disappointing, if I may say so.
Absolutely.
So it would appear from what you're saying that the PT are on the defensive in this election, even though they have a popular candidate in Lula. What are they actually promising?
Another complex question. I would say PT is the most important left-wing party in Latin America. I would personally say in all the Americas, and it has a solid proposal to the progression, to the development of the country, and how much of it can be implemented, considering the Congress, considering the military, considering the elites, remains to be seen. What is being also, as Lula builds this very broad support, so you have people that hated Lula until yesterday that have been supporting him. You have a lot of elites supporting him as well. So how much that water down the program, we know that really has an impact. So that is a concern, how much can be implemented in the current situation. What Lula has been putting forward is really a discussion about the protection of the programs that they have implemented. So the welfare programs that they have implemented in a sustainable way, the expansion of education and health that have been dilapidated under this government, the end of the secret budget system and going back to a transparent budget system, and other mechanisms of credit and microcredit for entrepreneurs. But one thing that Lula, for instance, mentioned from the beginning was the reviewing the change in labor rights in the country that happened as soon as Dilma got impeached. Was the first thing they did was to reduce labor rights. And Lula said he would review it, and obviously we haven't been hearing much of it. So it's hard to know if he would be able to pull that forward, but that's an important point. Other important points that he has been bringing forward have been really around tackling hunger in the country, tackling, we have a waiting list for people to receive that welfare, tackling the waiting list, going back to building houses, going back to the basics is pretty much the program. But how much of that we'll be able to see remains to be discussed. there is a commitment to sustainable development, and there is a commitment to the protection of Amazon and the Pantanal. There is another very important Brazilian ecosystem. But we, as I said, we don't hear that. We don't hear that in the discourse. We don't hear that in the public. It's written there, but we don't hear that. And we don't hear that because, unfortunately, the debate is not being higher class, and I blame the opponent.
Yes. I did see footage following the election of Bolsonaro of construction workers that were involved in the social programs around housing construction being laid off en masse. I'm wondering, will those social programs be put back in place?
Yes. So that's so at the moment, well, if they will be put back in place remains to be seen with the Congress that we have, right? How to operate with a Congress that is so right-wing remains to be seen. What happened in Brazil, and again, the difficulty of the word polarization, I think I already made clear, but what happens in Brazil was really a reduction of the center and center-right. So what happened? And the left had some gains, not the revolutionary and extreme left, but the left, the Workers' Party, PSOL had some gains, but most of that, center-right, migrate to the extreme right. So what we see now is the extreme right having so much presence in the Congress and being so, entrenched in the current government that it will be hard to see what kind of things will be able to pass in Parliament, will be able to pass in Congress. But the intention for the Workers' Party at the moment is very much a back to basics, very much back at education budget that actually covers education, a health budget that actually covers health, building houses, getting those programs up and running again.
So the PT Workers' Party we can think of as being a genuine mass workers' party in the 90s. But it's been often criticised as putting in place some neoliberal reforms. Can you talk about their historic role?
So yes. So the Workers' Party, as I said, the discussions start in the 80s and runs for its first election. Lula already runs for like federal representative in 86, I think, and then runs for president in 89. So around 86, they were already running for elections. And actually the party starts with some big groups. So unions, a big organized group, some social movements, particularly social movements around health, social movements around housing, and social movements around the right to land, so the landless. So the roots of what will later become the landless movement were already there. And comunidades eclesiásticas de base, I have to say in Portuguese to actually think how to translate, but it's actually the Catholic groups inside communities. So why you don't have churches, and that has really kind of disappeared in the Catholic Church. I can't really comment why, but it also plays on why the evangelicals took up that space. That space had another players in the past, and so there were groups that unite around Christian beliefs, and they tended to be quite radicalized, quite left wing. Brazil is a country that took up a lot back then of the Teologia da Libertação, so liberation theology, that one of the main people we can think of in Brazil that would push for that is Leonardo Boff, and a lot of Catholic priests and a lot of nuns have been involved in hiding and supporting socialists and communists that were hiding during the military coup. So actually these are the big groups that come together to start the Workers' Party. Yes, socialist groups came together as well, but in terms of mass movements, large groups, and the Workers' Party was very symbolic for these people, and really translate their desires and their ideas during the process of the formation of the constitution that we have, that is from 88, and then throughout. And there is a shift in the obviously Brazil, big country, large population. We have a lot of differences in regions. So what the Workers' Party looks like in the Northeast, maybe different from it looks in the South, a bit different from it looks in the North. So that's something we always need to be aware of. But if we're talking about national policies, there is a big shift in 2002 when Lula realizes that he'll have to expand the alliances to win the elections and write what is known as the letter to the Brazilian people. That is basically a letter to the banks saying we will not move towards, stopping privatization, and we're not going to move towards anything that could resemble a more social democratic or even socialist program. So and there you start the change. So many times what you see is this watered down policies that reduce labor rights or reduce rights in some way, and the defense of the Workers' Party was, well, it would be worse without us. We managed to make the best deal. And that is probably true, but then goes back to my original point, where you had 80% of the people on your side. Couldn't you do something more radical than cut a nice deal? Considering, though, how much the Workers' Party has been vilified since, we can just wonder what would have happened if they attempted a more radical program.
Okay, so there was certainly socialist groups within the PT Workers' Party. How does it stand today? Is there still a struggle for socialism within the party? And can you talk a little bit about the struggle for socialism without? Is there much of a socialist movement in Brazil that we can relate to?
Absolutely, 100% yes. I think it is important to say that we have socialist organized groups inside the Workers' Party. We have socialist organized groups outside the Workers' Party. We have two communist parties in Brazil. So we have, the left, and the socialist and communist left is present in the country, is present in social movements, runs unions. Some big unions are run by groups that would be very vocal about being socialist groups. Same with, segments of social movements. But it has been you have experiments in Brazil that you could say they bring something to the discussion of socialism, and at the same time, a lot of the more radical and more revolutionary discussion has been really, for the lack of a better word, co-opted by government structures, right? So a lot of activists have been absorbed into government structures, state or city-based, as PT grew, and PT did grew while it had a PT president. And a lot of the activists got busy with the running of day-to-day government machine. But we have the most interesting. We have socialists. We could talk that a lot of is observed in social movements such as the movement for accommodation and free housing, that is the MTST, or the landless movement, that is the MST movement. In all their experiments, you can see socialist elements, and you can see not only elements, but an attempt for a movement towards socialism. And I would defend that. Not everybody would have the same understanding, but I would defend that that's very much present in those and in many other movements. Having said that, a more recent development have been the presence of the more radical left in social media, right? I said so many bad things about social media, but we have seen, especially in the space of YouTube, a lot of Brazilian YouTubers that are outright communists, outright socialists, making a lot of propaganda that is, of very good quality, being forthcoming and gathering a lot of followers. So you have socialist YouTube channels with, they don't have the millions of, non-political channel, but they will have the 400, 500,000 followers and being very strong in their movement. And then even recently, when some Australian YouTube channels partner with Brazilians talking about the situation in the Amazon for their videos, and even in the US, when Jacobin invites a Brazilian, who they invite is not only a YouTuber, influencer, whatever is the name, but someone that is actually a socialist, a very prolific writer and academic socialist that is also in the YouTube space. So I think this is very encouraging to get that message in different spaces and to keep it, to keep diversifying how we make socialism, an important point in the in Brazil today.
You mentioned PSOL before, PSOL. Have they played much of a role in the recent elections?
Yes, and yes, I would say they. So the Socialism and Freedom Party has been supporting the Workers' Party in this election. It did not. It had its own candidate in other elections. It chose to support nationally Lula, and it had its own candidates for federal and state representatives. And actually, the best voted federal representative in São Paulo, and I think the second in the country, or maybe the third in the country, was actually Guilherme Boulos, that is the leader of the MTST, the Movement for Accommodation, but also a member of the PSOL. So they have expanded the number of representatives. They are a growing party. They have a lot of creativity in the way they present their ideas, and they have been with the Workers' Party in this one. So they have been part of the struggle.
Okay. Sorry about my cat.
Well, cats are welcome.
Last things. What's the best and worst case scenarios in Brazil at the moment following this election?
Well, the best case scenario is always the socialist revolution, but I don't think that's on site. So I think what we're expecting from this election is that Lula will win, and Lula will win with a good difference and with a good, a well-built support that when the extreme right makes its advances, we will be able to resist. So, the Supreme Court will be able to resist, the Electoral Commission will be able to resist, the strategic sectors and their CEOs and leaders will be able to resist. So in many ways, we are expecting that they will not find echo in their, that they will be a minority and they will knock at doors and not be answered. So that's the best thing. So Lula winning only is not the ideal. The ideal is that Lula wins and people stand strong, because for sure a strong wave of complaints will come. And then once that happens, I think the best case scenario is for, we go back to the streets, we go back to the streets with all the precautions regarding COVID and everything else. And we're back on streets making clear that we want this to be a left-wing government, making clear that we don't want this government to be a government that will serve their last-minute supporters instead of the people that have been with them for 30 years. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is Bolsonaro being re-elected. That's absolutely the worst case scenario. I cannot imagine anything worse for Brazil or for our neighbors, to be honest.
Sure, and the possibility of Bolsonaro seizing the election.
So they will come. That's it. The wave will come. They will make noise. How much power they will have to actually take over? It's an unknown. It's an unknown category. They do not seem to have international support. That's a good thing. It doesn't seem that US would back them up or European forces would back them up. This perception of Lula as a way to socialism is a perception that belongs only to the extreme right in Brazil. Unfortunately, not even we believe that he's going to deliver socialism. But so it doesn't look like Bolsonaro would find echo anywhere beside its own military, beside Brazilian military. And I don't think the Brazilian military would act without international backing. But who knows? Who knows when they come, if that international backing will appear, or if they will be crazy enough to actually move forward without international backing. I don't think a civil war is impossible. I think it is unlikely. But again, you don't need a civil war. You just need a small revolt for a lot of people to get hurt, for a lot of people to die, for a lot of, a lot of things to get really harder for the working poor. So I really hope it doesn't happen. But I do believe they will make noise, and I do believe they will attempt to make it happen. I just believe they will be unsuccessful very fast.
So it would appear that this phenomenon, it's been described as Bolsonarismo, is strengthening and is consolidating itself. What about the counterpower, the movements on the streets, the movements of landless peasants? Are they really crystallizing in this election? Will they be able to respond to a Bolsonaro dictatorship?
Look, the thing is, we have not been on streets a lot because of COVID. So if you think that's a government that starts in 1st January 2019, most of this government happened under COVID, and with a president that was completely against lockdowns, but state government having sense and instituting lockdowns or similar things to lockdowns. So that's why a lot of street demonstrations have not happened. So I do believe we would take the streets again. I do believe we would be loud and clear. But if Bolsonaro is in power with the military on his side and actually pushing things even far right, it's anyone's guess how that would end up. And I think there is where having a lot of left-leaning and democratic governments in Latin America really help us, having neighbors that would really be opposing directly to Bolsonaro, if that's the case.
Okay. Any final words to conclude, Anna?
Well, do your best to elect Lula on the 30 of October. Tell your friends and family, any Brazilian that check if they're voting, the struggle continues, and we will probably have to talk more about it, to how to move forward. But let's all believe, even though Lula cannot deliver everything, having a left-wing government in Brazil is good for Brazil, and it's great for Latin America. So it's good for everybody.
Thanks for your time, Anna.
Thank you, Andrew. All the best.